You're listening to Informed Dissent. If you're a longtime listener, welcome back. If you're new, welcome, and here's the lay of the land. I'm Jamie Reed, a lesbian and a whistleblower who worked inside a pediatric gender center. My co-hosts are Lauren Legere, also a lesbian and a longtime LGBT advocate. Our other co-host is Corey Cohn, a gay man who underwent gender transition early in his life. All three of us come from the left, and none of us fit the story you've been told about who questions gender medicine. And that's not an accident. Every week, we will cover the headlines you need to know across medicine, law, sports, schools, and prisons. And then we dig in. The three of us, and most weeks, a guest worth hearing from. We built this show because we believe that the most important conversations about gender politics are the ones happening between people with real stakes and real disagreements. Free inquiry, honest argument, and dissent that's worth something because it's actually informed. Welcome. Welcome back to Informed Dissent. This episode kicks off something we've been wanting to do for a while, a series on libraries. Not library politics in the abstract, but the real thing. What happens when an institution, especially here in America, which was built to protect open inquiry and intellectual freedom, becomes the battleground for it instead? The idea started close to home. This past Pride Month, my local library ran a whole slate of really interesting programming that left me with more questions than answers about who gets to curate that programming, who's accountable when something goes wrong, and what intellectual freedom means when it's colliding head-on with a one-sided ideology. I filed a few complaints. What came back wasn't just a non-answer. At one point, a recording of a public session was quietly edited after the fact and still left up on YouTube. That's not just a library problem, that's a trust problem. So we're going to spend the next few episodes pulling, as they say, on this specific thread. We start with someone who has spent his entire career thinking about this kind of tension. James LaRue is a retired director of the Garfield County Public Library District in Colorado and was the former director of both the Freedom to Read Foundation and the American Library Association's Office for Intellectual Freedom. He ran that from January of 2016 to November of 2018. He's the author of two books. Earliest book was called The New Inquisition, Understanding and Managing Intellectual Freedom Challenges. And more recently, he published a book in 2023 called On Censorship, A Public Librarian Examines Cancel Culture in the US. I think this is probably the best place to start. If anyone can help us understand what intellectual freedom in library systems is supposed to look like and how far we might have drifted from it, it's him. So now on to the show. Jamie LaRue, thank you so much for joining us today on Informed Dissent.
My pleasure.
Before we get started, I just want to point out one of the things we'll be talking about today is your book. It is found under the name James LaRue, but we're going to be talking about a book titled On Censorship, A Public Librarian Examines Cancel Culture in the US. So we have that here. I want to start off a little bit about your background. So you have spent decades in libraries. Can you tell me what first drew you? What was your first passion about working in a library?
Well, I think it was two things. One, loved comic books. I was probably the only 6-year-old on my block who could spell invulnerable. And one day I walked into this bookmobile, just kind of floated in this blue haze on the horizon. And I walked into this, and there was Mrs. Johnson, this quintessential librarian, and looked at me like I was the man she had been waiting for all of her life. And she said, "So how can we help you?" And I said, "Well, I've been reading in these comic books. I didn't know what librarians would think about that. Comic books are good or bad. But I said, I've been reading about the speed of light, and how did they figure out that light had a speed? I thought it would be like on or off. And then how did they figure out how fast it was? And then I had been raised in this sort of verbally abusive childhood home where everything you said was stupid. And I kind of braced myself and thought, oh, here it comes. And her eyes just lit up and glittered. And she said, "What a fascinating question. Let's find out." And so it's like, had me at hello. I want to be a librarian. I want to be a place that when you walk into a room, everybody in the room jumps to attention and says, "Curious child in the room, how can we help?"
That's an amazing story. I was I felt good about just finishing my summer library's reading club, but you just knocked that one out. So you have worked in multiple actual libraries as a library director. You were also the director of the ALA, which stands for the American Library Association's Office for Intellectual Freedom and the Freedom to Read Foundation. Tell me a little bit about your professional background. What does it mean to run a library and what is kind of a little short summary of the ALA?
Okay, well, I've worked in all kinds of different sorts of libraries, but most of my experience over 27 years has been as the key administrator, chief executive officer of a district library. So in both cases, it's like county-wide system. There's 6 libraries in one, 7 libraries in the other. And you just kind of oversee things, and it could be a budget stretching from about 12 million to up to about 27 million. And
Okay.
so my job is to kind of work with the board, set long-range planning, connect to the community, and adopt policies. And this issue of intellectual freedom has followed me everywhere that I've gone. When I was in Douglas County, which is just north of Focus on the Family in Colorado Springs, I had about 250 attempts to restrict access or remove library resources. And then when I went to ALA, we dealt with about one a day for about 3 years. So that's another 1,000 or so. And then when I went to my final public library directorship in the beautiful western slope of Colorado, I thought I'll just ease into retirement. And then we found out that we were the kind of the battleground for the latest iteration of censorship in the United States. Very organized, kind of a Christian nationalist front on top of it. And not so much now about challenging library materials as it is about political takeover and control.
Okay.
So I've dealt with some 1,200 challenges in my life.
Okay. I loved this quote. You wrote once, "You get the censorship you deserve."
Yeah, I think that's true.
What does that mean in practice? And then can you just lay out what does a healthy library community look like?
So there are no two libraries that are alike because everyone is used in a different way by the community. So I think a good library says, I'm going to go out and we're going to try to sample the issues of our culture. And so mostly that means in America that probably 85 to 90% of our content comes from just 5 publishers. Same
Okay.
thing is true in the academic world, but they're different. It's a different set of publishers. And what we do is we try to representatively sample things that seem to be popular. And then we get rid of the things that our public doesn't respond to. And so you say, okay, you didn't like that, but you liked a lot more of this. And libraries tend to appeal to the audience that supports them. So a good library is always talking to its community. It's this kind of a complicated dance move where we're trying to figure out, here's what people are talking about in a larger culture. What are we talking about and what do we care about in this local community? And so the library is a place where you investigate the world from the safety of a beautiful building.
Can I ask when you said you kind of get rid of what the community isn't responding to?
Yeah,
I'm imagining that would mean you purchased a book, you put it in your stacks, nobody's checked it out, it's been there for 4 years, then that
it's
gets
gone.
weeded out.
That's
Okay.
right. But,
Okay.
and that's just to make way for content that will find a reader.
Okay. So I want to give you a little bit of background about me before we move into the next questions, because I think that some of my questions are going to be sort of nuancy and complicated.
Okay.
So I am a Midwesterner. Oh, and most of our listeners already know this, but you all just have to bear with me. I'm a Midwesterner. Uh, I would say that I was a lifelong Democrat. I'm a lesbian. I have a master's of science in clinical research. I'm also the mom of five children. So
Five
I'm
children.
kind of I'm tipping into all these other little communities
Yeah.
here that the library interacts with
Yeah.
a lot.
Yeah.
But then I am a whistleblower from within a pediatric gender center.
Hmm.
So I have this very interesting, nuanced, kind of weird niche where I worked in a pediatric gender center. I care a lot about what would be referred to as the LGBTQIA community. And I feel like we have this intense cultural moment right now in the world around what this community looks like. But digging a little bit deeper, I run an org that is the LGB org, and we are separated off from what is referred to as the TQ. So, with all of that background, I want to ask you about what happens when a book might never be canceled, but never purchased. And so, I want to give you a little bit of an example. So, there's a friend of our podcast by the name of Ben Appel. His book might be, oh, it's right here. Okay. I should have done this in advance. So I'm going to see who published it first. Bombardier Books. You ever know? Do you know that
Bombardier?
publisher?
Bombardier?
Bombardier?
No,
No.
I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay. So he wrote this book. It came out in, I think it was last year, 2020. Let's see, 2025. Okay. His book is called Cis White Gay: The Making of a Gender Heretic.
Okay.
Okay. So I have about 26,000 followers on X, and I asked them to run a little weird little survey for me. I asked them go to their local library and check the catalog and see if this title was in it. I got responses from all over the world. Not only was the book absent basically everywhere, but a number of them had intentionally filled out an acquisition request by a community member. Hey, please buy this book. And a
Uh-huh.
number of them were told no.
Were they told why?
They were not told why. Um, so my question is kind of what happens when there's a public debate and it feels like to some of us the library system is simply just not acquiring one side of the debate functionally.
Hmm.
Has that come across your desk, or has this been something you've seen before?
Sure. And I guess I feel like I need to give a little context about this too. I think around issues of, and my kind of the point I make in my book is that 97% of what we have kind of looks backwards into our culture. So we've
Okay.
been buying over the course of many years. And so typical themes show up and genres show up, and we tend to just kind of reflect the reading habits of the community. And then there's always about 3% of our collection developed over the past 15 years is kind of sampling these things that are, it's called what previously historically marginalized populations.
Okay.
So it used to be very difficult to find books that featured Black characters or featured gay characters. Now we've begun to see a little bit of that coming in through those same mainstream publishers. So when we buy stuff, all of the complaints are about the 3%. All the complaints are about what is not quite mainstream, is kind of coming in on the fringe of our society. And
Okay.
I think what libraries do is we're tracking social change. Okay, so now a new issue comes up and you say, how come my side of the debate isn't being heard? And the first thing I would say to you as a librarian is like, is that book published in one of the big five publishers? Because if it isn't in our stream of logistics, it's
Okay.
kind of
Hold
hard
on
for us
one.
to know about it. Sure.
Sorry, I got it. That was the weirdest sidebar. We have walkie-talkies I have five kids. They have
Uh-huh.
walkie-talkies when they go out and play, and I didn't realize a couple of the walkie-talkies hadn't been turned off. Okay,
Okay. So to kind of go back to why does
go
something
back.
not show up in a library?
Yes.
It's we have systems, logistic systems to figure out how does the book get from the publisher to us. And so there's kind of three ways that happens. One of them is our main publishers send us these books. Here's our catalog. Here's what's coming out. We go, oh, I recognize that author, or yeah, that's a topic that people are interested, and you choose from what is offered to us.
Okay.
And then the second one is that it's reviews. Librarians tend, if it's an unknown author or a new topic,
Oh,
we say, can we read a librarian review of this material to find out what they think? Is it a good fit for urban collections, rural collections, suburban, that kind of thing? And then
okay.
the last one is what people ask for themselves. If they come and say, I'm asking for this, and we may not have a review for it, but usually if we can track it down, we will.
Okay.
So the system is biased towards the products of the big five publishers.
Okay. And I think you wrote in the book, I'm on page 26, these are the big five publishers. Penguin, Random House, HarperCollins, Macmillan, Simon and Schuster, and then is it Hatchet?
That's it.
Hatchet. Okay. I don't know anything about these publishing houses. Are these, I know Macmillan, I feel like feels like the academic, the kid textbook ones, but I might be wrong about that.
That's,
Um,
that's one of their lines.
okay. So has it always been dominated by five?
Pretty much, and I remember back when I was in library school, dawn of 1978, same kind of problem then. It's like there's a few big conglomerates that tend to buy up and buy up and buy up. And so what librarians offer to you is what is in our distribution channel.
Okay. I'm gonna segue and ask you a really weird question that came up once. When books turn into ebooks, is it the same
Oh.
five publishing houses that kind of drive the content of those ebooks as well?
It is very much, and that's further complicated by the fact that when ebooks came out, librarians were trying to figure out how do we provide access to them. And then, just as is the case for the distribution of print books, a couple of big distributors came up to say, okay, well, we'll work with the publishers. We'll get the ebook. We'll put content protection on it. We'll only allow one person at a time to check them out. And that system was a company called Overdrive.
Yep.
And
Okay.
they're pretty much the ebook supplier for most of the public libraries in the United States. So even though there's five big publishers, and they're, mid-sized publishers kind of get into the mix a little bit, and even some self-published authors, but most of it still comes from the big five and one distributor.
Okay. So when I am a community member in my local library and I go to the library and I feel angry because I see 30,000 books, I feel like, on one topic of the debate, and I can't find one on my topic of the debate. I shouldn't storm up and yell at the librarian at the desk because, in essence, this problem could have been upstream, 10 steps removed than having anything to do with the librarian in front of me, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, that's usually the case. But I also think that you know the story that I kind of start off with a book there is that I hate Brussels sprouts. You go to a marketplace and you say, "Oh, I saw a sign about with Brussels sprouts there. Don't I deserve the right not to be offended by something that I find in the library?" And the store manager that I talked to said, "Well, people don't come to the grocery store because we don't have what they don't want." Meaning to make that less convoluted.
Yeah.
You go to a library because it has something that you want. And most of the librarians that I know, if you were to come in and say, I'm looking for something from this perspective, can't find anything. Can you help me add something to the collection? Here's a couple of suggestions. Most of the librarians I know would say, okay, sure. Yeah, we'll get that. Because our
Okay.
goal is to get books that people want to read.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the books that do get challenged and the books that you got challenges of. You're saying basically one a day at the ALA. And I want to lay this out pretty clearly because I personally don't want to have kind of a good, nice debate about some books should be censored. I'm actually not very much, I'm very not pro, let's kick the books out of the library.
They're coming in from a side of like, what do you do if you want to add something to a collection that is still kind of small in the culture, a
I'm,
minority voice?
I feel like we're at this really weird inflection point right now where there are a lot of people who are very upset about some of the things that they're finding in the library and especially in certain areas. So I think you did a good job in the book about talking about kids and what's there for kids. And I think you did a good job also saying kids don't really want to read material that's not for kids. Um,
Okay.
so I'm not coming from this as a perspective of I want the library to ban a whole bunch of books.
Okay.
Okay. But there was a line in your book that really jumped out at me. Um, so you were talking about there sometimes is reasonable objections or the need for some regulation. And I think the
Well,
line
I
was
don't know if I kind of,
online. Go ahead. I interrupted you.
yeah, I don't think about it quite like that. What we do is we sort things into what we think is intended audiences. So we put kids' book in a kids area because that's what they're drawn to, that's what they're interested in. We can see that they engage with them. And then adult books go in adult area. So
Okay.
that isn't like regulation. It's more just like you market things to the intended audience.
Okay. I'm going to read your quote and then I'm
Okay.
going to give you a little bit of background. I think the quote says online threats, public health misinformation, and both personal and institutional harassment seem to be reasonable objections of regulation.
Okay. Yeah. And I stand by that. That's not library
Yeah.
research, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Speech
So
is not.
I think that there are going to be a lot of our listeners who feel like right now we're in this weird position in our culture where they see some of the medical interventions that were rolled out to kids as having a lot of public health conflict right now. And that there are some countries that are rolling certain things back. I'm thinking very specifically about gender and what was rolled out for kids in different places. And I know that a lot of our listeners feel like some materials that were pro these medical interventions were put out towards kids. And I think that they would argue that there's a public health quandary right now. And I think a lot of people felt like the libraries jumped in on this topic and they put materials out in the kids sections that they might have been pushed by those five major publishers, but there could be a reasonable public health question. What, how would you qualify? Like, have you thought through what is public health information? I'm not interested in going far down into COVID because it's not my jam, but like, I think COVID probably kicked up some of those questions too. Like, how do
Absolutely.
libraries weigh in on that?
Well, and I think what we do is again, you can imagine that around COVID or around some of these issues, people make stuff up that's pretty wild. It can be pretty conspiracy theory oriented. Does the library sample everything? And I would think that most librarians would say, okay, who's the publisher? Meaning, is it reputable? Who is the author? What are the kind of credentials? But we're not supposed to say, and we agree or we disagree with their conclusions because we're not qualified to do that. And so what'll be is somebody comes out with something and say, okay, here's a sample of it. We go, okay, maybe a controversial stand, but comes from somebody who has some credentials from a publisher that is, reputable. They've done some fact checking. And then this often happens. I described this case once where I bought a book by Al Franken and a book by what's her name, Ann Coulter.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
they do not agree, right? We put a
Yeah.
copy of those books out to say, here are new books about a topic. One is on one side of the political spectrum, one is on the other. And then 15 people came up on the first day and said, we want that Ann Coulter book. And nobody was checking out Al Franken. And so we wind up buying more copies of Ann Coulter because that's what our community is requesting. And then someone inevitably comes in and says, Al Franken, see, you liberal librarians are pushing this perspective. We go, no, we have one copy of Al, and we have 15 copies of Ann Coulter. And it's not biased because this is the only one that's on the shelf. And so again, I think that when
Okay.
people say librarians are pushing something, no, it's like we are sampling what the culture makes available to us, trying to get something that's more or less reputable. And there are many topics that not everybody agrees on. So we're not going to decide in advance who's right. We'll say at present, maybe of the last 100 books published, 99 of them were sort of pro LGBTQ plus. That came from our publisher. We've had people that ask for them. They get checked out. We buy them.
Okay.
Is it balanced? No, because I'm not sure that the publishing output is balanced.
Got it. Okay. Okay. I'm hearing you completely with the we're going to buy the Al Franken, we're going to buy the Ann Coulter, we're going to put them next to each other, and then this one takes off. You can see in the history it's checked out. Okay. I totally get that. I think that is where the libraries should land.
Okay.
I want to throw a kind of monkey wrench into that from what I see in library land. And I want to make this perfectly clear. I adore libraries. I think that there are like three institutions that still like if I had to pick, there are three things you get to keep in the apocalypse and everything else falls apart. I think there should be a post office, a library, and a YMCA. Those would be probably
I used all of those with pride.
my three
Absolutely.
picks. Yeah. So one of the things I have been noticing, it's not just that the two books go up on display and they're there and they're given kind of equal weight. What I'm seeing is I walk into my library, and first of all, my librarians themselves are wearing their name tag on lanyards, and they have 20 pins on their lanyards. And if I had to characterize those pins, 90% of them fall within some sort of political spectrum.
Well, that's not usual, I don't think. Generally speaking, like speaking again as an administrator, you say it might be that you have something like a pride button if there's a pride display going on. But generally speaking, we say the dress code that we would do for most of our employees is that you don't try to pick one side or the other of the political debate because it pisses off half of your customer base. So that's kind of an unusual thing. I don't know if that's just your library or I
Can
don't think that describes
can I
what I see.
can I write my library director because I've actually written them this same exact concern over and over again because it is the pride again, lesbian it is the pride pin and then there's four trans pins and then there's two pronoun pins that say you have to call me they them and then there's two more political and then it is what I'm seeing. Um,
So that feels like to you this is like a propaganda kind of push of a political stance by library staff.
yes, and it feels like then I don't even know that I can walk up and say, "Hey, I really wanted a book on this topic, but you don't really seem to have any. Can we order some?" Like I just don't see how that conversation would go
Hmm.
when the staff is kind of outwardly, is there anything in the ALA? Is there anything that kind of says
Yeah, we're
people
not supposed to
should
push
be
personal preferences at the public. We're supposed to respond to an information request. Really, I honestly think, Jamie, any good librarian would be thrilled to say, "Oh, I'm sorry, you found a hole in our collection. Have you heard any good books?" I mean, that's what we should be doing.
okay, okay. And let's go back to the kind of books that get banned a little bit. So you had another line, I thought it was great. It says, the books won't make them gay any more than reading mysteries will make them murderers.
Right.
Uh, I'm a Midwestern lesbian. I grew up here and I have distinctive memories of going to the YA section and finding some books, and they would be few and rare, but where I felt reflected.
Yeah.
And I agree that there's kind of this, I don't think you can I don't think you can push someone to be gay because you offered something in the collection. But I have a but here. I do worry that we have books, again, especially in the kids section, where there will be books about gender. There will be books about how do kids know their pronouns. There will be books that have pictures in it where people have scars across their chest where you can tell they had a gender surgery. And from the public health perspective, there is right now evidence and concern about peer clustering and social contagion. And I hate to make this leap, but I feel like would the library draw a line if there was like a TikTok trend where kids ate the Tide Pods? I don't think the library would put material like of a trend like that. Like, is there kind of an institutional thought process? What happens if we do learn there was a social contagion among youth?
Well, there are many books that we have that advance scientific theories or sociological theories that later get disproved by science. In theory, we should be reflecting the ongoing consensus of the field, right? So if you think about something like climate change, okay, most of the books that we have are probably going to say, yeah, there's studies about this. Here's the information. There might be some representation from the side to say, no, no, all that's bunk, and this oil and gas funded study found that oil and gas is a wonderful thing for the community. But it's not the librarians who make the decision about what that final consensus is. It plays out for a while in the public sphere as people argue about it and talk about it, and other books get written and people change their minds. So are we going to step in and say, no, we've decided that this one, well, okay, let's take something else like Holocaust denial. Okay. You're not going to find a lot of books that are Holocaust denial in libraries, right? And I don't think it's because we are saying we consider all that stuff to be anti-Semitism. We say, no, that has been pretty thoroughly discredited. We know that the Holocaust took place. We're not actively seeking to present the other side of something that seems largely to be a settled concern. The concern around transgender support, hormone blocking or surgery, all that kind of stuff is contentious right now, but it's also kind of at the beginning of that debate. So what exactly do you think libraries should do? It's like, okay, here's what people are talking about. Here's what's come out now. Maybe there's a dearth about that. So my first advice to people saying, okay, I feel like I'm swimming upstream against the culture. Write your own book. Write a really good book. Make sure that you've done your fact checking. Talk to a librarian to get it distributed to. Find somebody to write a review for it.
Do you know much about how those five big publishing houses, how do people crack into those? I mean, if part of the problem
Well,
is that,
yeah, it is part of the problem. And I think I said in the book too, it's like the problem today is not writing a book. The problem is getting anybody to notice it. Because if you take a look at outside of the big five, and they produce maybe 350,000 titles a year. Most libraries don't buy 350,000 titles. Small and independent presses produce another 300,000 a year. And now we're up to over 2 million titles published every year that are self-published. Many of them are crap, but some of them are really, really well done because it was somebody that tried to get something published by a big publisher. It sold only so. They know how
okay.
to write a book, but now they sell things direct. And so trying to figure out how do we navigate this extraordinary increase in the output of the human race to publish all this stuff? How do you sort through it to figure out what's believable and what's not? And so I think the libraries haven't caught up to that. We still rely on those traditional systems of somebody got an agent, they sold it to a publisher, the publisher pushed it to us, the librarian reviewed it, and we know it's okay.
How many, so if by my math, between the big publishers, the mid-size, you're talking about like 650,000 titles per year. How many titles does your average urban library buy per year?
It's probably going to be under 50,000, maybe under 10,000 for most libraries.
Wow. And how many do you weed and kill from the collection? Is it about the same?
For many libraries around the country, I would say that the average lifespan for a book is probably 5 years. It comes in, it gets a little bit of interest, it's more popular, it loses popularity, nobody checks it out, we replace it. And so
Interesting.
for a lot of smaller libraries, talking about the physical collection now, not the digital one, it might be one book in, one book out. Depends on how much space you've got.
Okay. Um, I'm gonna pick your brain. Something happened with my local library this summer, and I want you to just give me some feedback. Did I handle it great? Did they handle it great? What could have been done differently?
Okay.
So, my local library put out their Celebrate Pride pamphlet for June of 2026. And
Right.
again, see, I go to my library once a week with the kids.
Very
So I
good. Good,
picked it
good.
up and I went through all of the schedule of events. And I thought, okay, this is interesting. This is interesting. And I signed up for two virtual programs.
Okay.
And one of the virtual programs was titled The History of Queer Psychology. And I attended. And then because I attended, I got a link to the YouTube video that kind of lives in infinity after that. And towards the end of the program, the presenter said something that is actually factually incorrect and sensitive. So the presenter gave a quote about suicide rates, which is a
Hmm.
pretty sensitive topic. And coming from health, we know you don't really want to talk about, suicide has some parameters on how to safely talk about it. So the presenter stated that within the next year, and this was the quote, 70% of all transgender people will commit suicide. So that actually
That's
has,
shocking statistic.
yeah, because it's also not true. It's
Okay.
shockingly not true at all. And I heard that and my jaw hit the floor and I thought, this is a problem. The guy had really bad information that he said. He said it in a library program. The library didn't make a correction. So I sent a letter to the library. A
Mhm.
couple. I sent a letter to the director and CEO, and I sent a letter to a couple of the board members. And I said, I think this needs a correction. And this is what they did. Uh, they sent me back a letter. And they said, in my question, I said, will the library review this presentation in light of my concern raised here? Will it consider either removing the video or providing a correction notice appended to the video or both? Can I tell you what they did?
Sure.
After we could not verify the mentioned 70% transgender suicide statistic, the library contacted the professor for clarification and has removed the 1 minute and 57-second segment from the YouTube video.
Well,
They cut it. They didn't tell anybody they cut it except for me. They didn't put a notice on the YouTube video that they cut it. They didn't tell anybody that had signed up for the program. Hey, we put out some really bad public health information. They just made it disappear. Um, I don't think I'm not a professional librarian. I don't think that falls within the interpretation of censorship by altering library resources, but I don't know.
so what did you want the library to do?
I wanted them to say in the YouTube video, this program was put on and there was a significant factual error presented that has a meaningful issue for public health. This is the statistic that this presenter said. This is not correct. Please view this video in light of our acknowledgement that this is a factual error.
So do you think that obligation to review every statement by a speaker held at the library is something that is part of the library's responsibility?
I I don't know, but I also know that in programming like this, a lot of these speakers are paid by the library. So
Well,
then I feel a catch like you paid for this guy, you didn't review. I don't know. I don't know the best thing here, but I do know that worry about I worry about it. And that's what I don't know.
my take is it's almost like this is the give and take of public discourse. I have yet to go to a lecture that everything that the speaker said was 100% true. Like everybody gets misinformation creeps into everything. And so once the program comes out, there are many options for you as a member of the public. You could have said, well, it was a remote meeting. You may not have been able to interrupt the speaker at the time to say, can you please cite the source for that? I don't believe that that's correct. That's one of the ways that people correct each other in public. Or it's on YouTube. You say, here's a comment. I've gone back and here's my source for this. And the statistic that you cite is incorrect. So
Okay.
that's just part of the dynamics of, public debate, people trying to say better and better things in public. I don't think you did anything wrong, and I'm not sure that the library did anything wrong either. It's like so they believed enough based on your letter to say it looks like this is not factually true. They went back to contact the speaker. That's kind of an unusual thing. Say we
Oh,
had a
okay. Okay.
we had a public complaint about this, and then we went back and reviewed it, and it
Okay.
looks like you were mistaken. How do you want us to handle that? And it could be a big public apology, or it could be, I'm going back to edit my lecture, my talk, to remove the part that was incorrect. I've been corrected.
D Am I wrong though? Is the library supposed to alter their own, like, is
Well,
there
it could,
something about like can access to the full work? Like, is there, I don't know. I just feel like there was something weird about how they just uh made that disappear.
it could be censorship by redaction, right? But in this
Yeah.
case, it's like it's not. They haven't removed it because they disagreed with the point of view. They removed a factual error in a public product.
Okay. How how is the public what if the public feels like, I mean, you said in any kind of presentation, there's going to be some element of possible error. I agree with that. But how is the public supposed to watch like everything? Are we supposed to be like clued into
What,
every
yeah,
lecture the
welcome
library
to
puts out?
censorship, like AI and misinformation and people who are deliberately lying to you. Yeah, it's a tough thing to try to sort it out. But I don't think so. What I always want to say is that the library's job is to put the evidence in front of you. It's not to interpret it for you. It's not to vet every piece of information that comes in, because much of this stuff is still in dispute. It isn't our job to adjudicate that and correct the record, except by replacing things that get superseded by new information.
Okay. So then you've run a library. What if I want to put on a presentation for next year's Pride
Yeah.
Month? How would I be a part of their programming?
You reach out to whoever is in charge of the programming at your library and say, I have a topic I would love to discuss. I know that this is a matter of some interest in our community. How do I get on your schedule?
Okay. What if they say that I'm a hate group?
Have you had that happen to you?
Yes.
Okay.
So what if they say I represent a hate group's position?
That's a pretty harsh decision on somebody's part. And I think that you well within your rights as a citizen to say, I would like to kind of appeal that to the larger community board. And then you book a opportunity to speak either at public comment or you ask to be placed on the agenda at the public board meeting
Okay.
and
And
say,
I'm
I want to appeal that status because I don't think it's right.
Okay. And I want to talk to you a little bit more about hate groups because I thought you wrote an excellent section in this book about it. So you acknowledged, I loved this part. And let me let you tell a story a little bit though. You put on a presentation about censorship within the libraries and you got pushback, did you not?
Oh yeah, yeah. Well,
You
it's funny to me that often the most challenged displays across America after Pride displays are banned books week. So we put up a display. These are all the books that have been removed by libraries, and people complain about us talking about books being pulled from the library.
But you even had some pushback from what has been referred to as like the left. Wasn't there pushback on Laura Ingalls Wilder books? And
Uh, so I always say it like this. I talk about there's a 97% looks back at our culture, and then the 3% that's community change. That's things changing in our society. All of the complaints are about that. And from the right, what people say is fend off those new voices. 97% isn't enough. It should all be about me. It should be about my experience. I only want to see myself reflected in the library. And then on the left, what I get is that 3% is not nearly enough, and you need to have more and more books about that. And I think that's probably true. But they also say, and let's go back and remove problematic books that reflect what we now know to be false or racist views. And that's where the Laura Ingalls Wilder books come in, where somebody says, well, you read these books and they make very insensitive comments about Native Americans, and that's damaging to young children. If they should read this, the book should be removed from the library. And so I view both of those things as to say, okay, it's not my job to pick sides or to say what percentage should this be at. I reflect what is being produced in our community. I talk about it in front of the community to say, here are the trends that I'm seeing. Does anybody else want to offer something that's a different view? And let's talk about it. Libraries are supposed to be places where you pursue knowledge.
So, is there a critique, though, that libraries are not just reflecting back the full breadth of the culture, but they're reflecting back the acceptable view of the time? So when you're
Sure.
saying we could historically go back and couldn't we say that the library is making a current like decision? It is reflecting the acceptable view in the moment of time about the culture.
Right. Most of our collections are going to reflect something like the zeitgeist. This is what mostly is going on in our culture. A good library, and I quoted this favorite saying from a friend of mine, a good library has something in it that will offend everyone. And typically that's the area where there's change in our society. We're going to have those books too. But yeah, I mean, if you go back to the South in the 1950s, you're not going to find a lot of black writers in the public library. You're going to find the pretty systemic white racism of the time and that place reflected in the library collections. Absolutely. We are of our times.
So then for the gender critical feminists right now, they're not going to see themselves reflected. They are considered yeah.
Yeah, it's harder for that voice to get heard. And so I think again, I keep seeing so much potential in the self-publishing trend where people are not going through the big systems of filtering, and
Okay.
you're more likely to find a fringe voice in self-publishing because it's more immediate and more direct. And I think libraries should do more to reflect some of that writing. But there are a lot of logistical questions about how best to do that,
Okay.
just because there's so many of them.
I found the quote here that
Okay.
I also highlighted. I'm on page 103 and it says, it's a little bit long. So you wrote it, so bear with me. I got to read it because the people who are listening didn't read it. Many librarians disagree with me. They believe hate speech, broadly defined, should be deplatformed at the library. For instance, hate groups shouldn't be allowed to hold meetings at the library, but that strategy has a predictable outcome. Expect the hate group to sue the library on First Amendment grounds, expect them to win, and maybe exact a settlement. They will still get to hold their meetings at the library.
Right.
Okay, so some of my good friends, feminists who are concerned about sex-based spaces for women, had this exact thing happen. So
Mm.
they booked the meeting room at their local library. One of them just got canceled outright as soon as it was found out what they were going to talk about, and they were called a hate group. And one of our friends' groups did actually exact a small settlement from the library. Another group of our friends booked a library space. They were physically assaulted on the way in by people who were angry that the
Wow.
library was allowing this view to happen. They had cans of soup thrown at them. They were bloodied and beaten for having this conversation
Yeah.
at the library. Then when they went in, the library told them they used the phrase that trans women are men, if they said that, they would be immediately shut down and thrown out of the library.
It's absolutely a violation of the First Amendment.
And I think so many people that I know right now want the world that you talk about where the space is allowed to have that. I mean, that's what I love about the library is that could be the space where we could have. And again, I'm not saying I support the library having a group that is bearing weapons and going in. and saying, we're going to burn this building to the ground. I mean,
Yeah.
that I do feel like there's a line for what is known as hate speech and what's not. But I feel like libraries have really tipped in some ways into allowing this whole concept of deplatforming and not allowing speech. Like, you've been at this for so long. Is this kind of like the worst of it, or is this just the same old, just in a different coat, and we're still having the same free speech fight?
I think it evolves over time. The one of the things I talk about in the book was before 1938, the First Amendment and intellectual freedom really wasn't a big deal for American libraries. It was like the most books at the least price for the most people. And then in
Okay.
1930, there was the rise of all this authoritarianism around the world, the rise of anti-Semitism, and then one library in Des Moines, Iowa, said, boy, we're really seeing a lot of invective and anti-Semitism and attacks on minorities. We're going to declare for the first time that the purpose of the library is for people to come in and examine everything, regardless of your race, background, sex, language, all that, national origin. And we have an obligation to try to provide things regardless of all of those things too. So that's aspirational, right? To say we're
Yeah.
going to do our very best to present everything from around the world. But what happens is in every community, there are different kind of vibes there too. Like you live in a red community or you live in a blue community. There are excesses of free speech. And I consider there are people within ALA that I would say have gone too far about that. They've replaced the notion of social justice as a more important value, as a preeminent value over intellectual freedom. I disagree with that. But it's also part of our zeitgeist, right? It's this kind of rising tide of everybody talking about this at the same time with the most diverse generation ever to have come along in our history. So, of course, you're going to have those kinds of tensions within a society. I don't know a way to eliminate those. I wish I could say that, I'm a big believer in, I would rather have two people come in and have real dialogue with each other about controversial topics rather than just try to suppress one side of the debate. But it is not an official position of the American Library Association, nor do I think it's a good librarianship to try to silence a voice just because you disagree with it.
Do you have any do you still have close ties with the ALA? Do you kind of keep a pulse on how they're addressing this? Because I do think you kind of nailed it when you said we've got this social justice versus this intellectual freedom
Um,
kind of real debate going on. I feel like I want I want people in the room who have the history memory that you have that can help guide younger librarians. But I also really worry about how they're learning in school, what they're learning in library science school, and how the
yeah.
ALA is kind of heading. Like, are you plugged in to help with the intellectual freedom argument? Beyond
Actually,
writing a beyond writing a book, which I read, yes. I mean, but
I've written two books on the subject,
okay,
and I do lecture fairly frequently for library science programs. But I
okay,
also think that there really have been generational shifts as we move. Each generation of librarians is a little bit different. And it was a topic of great debate at one of our national conferences. What do we mean by neutrality? And in my mind, it's like you don't go in with an agenda. You make a good faith effort to represent the culture around you. You respond to community needs. You try to expand things, and you recognize that it's dynamic. Well, there are people who are social justice oriented, very much the millennial generation and following. And they come in and they say, no, it's our job. It's part of the library job to stamp out systemic racism, to stamp out bigotry, to stamp out homophobic kind of stuff.
yeah.
I don't agree. I don't agree with that personally, because I think that's a misunderstanding of our
So
professional role.
those are all the librarians that work at my library. But go
Yeah,
ahead.
and it probably is generational, right? I mean,
Yeah,
it's
it is. It
probably
is.
within that group. And so, all that I can say is as every generation ages out of the profession, we said, okay, well, here's what I think I've learned. And that's why I tried to write this book, my reflections about it. I think that right now I see a censorious impulse on both sides of the political spectrum, far more weighted on the conservative side. I want to be clear
I hear
about
you.
that.
I hear you completely.
But
Yeah.
it's definitely on both sides, and I think it needs to be called out on both sides.
Okay. My final kind of questions. Talk to the average library patron who feels like their library has lost the plot in the zeitgeist.
Mhm.
How do you encourage people to interact with their library? What are the best ways? We've talked a little bit about asking for materials. Walk us through how you ask for materials. Walk me a little bit through how should somebody go talk at the open public board? Talk through the
Yeah,
best and I don't support people screaming at a board meeting with giant
right.
signs. I mean, how do we have a rational public professional debate, but how should people engage if they're really feeling like that they've been lost in this?
Let me tell a story. So I had a woman come up, and she was a Mormon member of our community, and she had helped us move one of our libraries from a little one to a big one, kind of organized the Boy Scout group, and very, very positive. And then she said, okay, you know that I like the library. I've helped the library. Private conversation. She says, I just want to stop by your office and chat. And I said, sure. And she said, you have a book at your library, a video called The God Makers. And it's very much an anti-Mormon religious bigotry sort of thing. It accuses Mormons of all kinds of things.
Okay.
And I said, okay. I said, let me look into that. And then she says, and the other thing I want to say is that I'm looking at your books about the Mormon faith in general, and you don't seem to have very much about it. Okay. So that's how you begin. You talk to a librarian, whoever you find to be the most approachable. And I hope you can
Okay.
find somebody that's approachable, right?
Okay.
So, I just have a concern about this. Can you help me work this through? And I've found a list of books that I can recommend, kind of on the background. Would you consider those kinds of things?
So
So,
coming prepared with some materials. So if
absolutely.
it's a
Yeah.
material request, know the materials.
Right. So
Okay.
the benefit, you're not only calling out an absence in the collection, but you're helping us improve it. So
Okay.
what I wound up doing with that Mormon woman was I said, I saw the video. It's awful. I'm astonished that you say anybody would find this believable. But in the process, I took a look at what we do have about the Mormon society, and God, our collection is awful. May I ask you for a recommendation of up to about $1,000 worth of books that you think more accurately represent your concern? And then she gave me that list, and we bought them. And I feel like that's how it should work. It shouldn't have to be this big political theater. It should be a conversation with people whose job it is to try to help you navigate an information environment. And if you call out gaps in our collection, we should be willing, our collection policies and all the training of librarians are, we want to help you find the things you're looking for. So
Okay.
that's how it should. And then if you feel you are stymied by that, you have
Yeah.
made good efforts to this and you've been shut down and nothing ever happens, then it's an escalation process. So one escalation is you write a letter to the editor. And again, not trying to paint the library as, everybody has gone liberal and woke and weird. But it's like we have a problem in our library. We're looking for something and we can't find it, and the library isn't helping us. Well, that's a legitimate public concern that can be aired publicly. If you
Okay.
show up at a public meeting, it could be you say to the director, I would like 5 minutes to address this issue, and I've got a presentation I want to do. Or it could be public comment. And public comment is like typically you have like 3 minutes to say something. And you say, here's who I am, here's where I live, I'm a representative, a member of the local community. And then in as non-emotional a fashion as possible, I'm looking for things about this, or I'm concerned about this public health issue. And I'm not finding very many materials about that. I'm just asking the library to step up and help us navigate that topic.
Okay.
So,
I'm going to reflect back for a minute what I've
okay,
heard.
okay,
Um, I love the idea of one-on-one conversation first. We're not screaming, but I still think what this comes back to is um, being proactive about what to add as opposed to just saying, get rid of this horrid book I find horrid. I want it to
right,
go away.
right, that's right.
Have there been books that you've made go away?
Yeah. A couple. The first one that comes to mind was it was called "Should You Kiss a Boy?" and it was written for the 10 to 12-year-old kind of range, and it asks that question: Is it okay if a girl kisses a boy? And the answer in that book, published in 1958, was no, but you can let
Oh,
them carry books on. Okay. And so I got this complaint about the book. It says, well, this might encourage girls to kiss boys as well. I don't think they're going to get the idea from the book. And I said, but having looked at this and realizing that today young girls are having menses by the age of 10, a
yeah.
book written in 1958 is so dated, we should have removed it a long time
Okay.
ago. So
Okay.
I'm gonna take that book out and I'm gonna replace it with something you're gonna like even less because it's more modern, but at least it's more current.
Okay. Okay. Um, I think my kind of final reflection, how how do we best protect intellectual freedom in our country? What are the like, how do we best keep this? I think it's so fundamental. How do we keep it protected?
One of the big comments that I made in the book and that I have seen over and over again is that censorship succeeds when nobody talks about it. So the best way to preserve intellectual freedom and the right freedom of inquiry is to stay engaged. Watch what's happening at a library board meeting. Comment on, talk to the staff about a display or a program afterwards. Just pay attention to what's going on around you. And I think that, very often what I've learned is the people that are leading these big campaigns that try to criminalize library materials and criminalize the people who provide access to them, it's a tiny, tiny percentage of the entire community. There was a study done by the Washington Post that found of 1,000 challenges to school libraries over the course of a year, they all came from 9 people, but they're very prolific and they really push something. So don't let yourself get marginalized. Step up and say, I have a concern about this. Build a relationship, ideally, both with the staff and with the governing body, and say, I'm for the greatest possible transparency and debate about this. And we may not agree, but we should agree that it's our job to try to figure it out.
Thank you. So where can our listeners, where can they find you? Where can they find your book? Is your book in the library?
It is in many libraries around the country. It's on Amazon. It's on Barnes and Noble. It may not be in your local bookstore,
Okay,
but
I've read one of your books. It's called On Censorship. A public librarian examines cancel culture in the US. What is the second book?
the other one was written way back in 2007, and it was called The New Inquisition:
Okay.
Understanding and Managing Intellectual Freedom Challenges. And you can reach me at jlarue at jlarue.com. That's JLARUE at JLARUE.com.
Thank you. I just want to say this. Thank you so much for being willing to engage in a conversation with me on this.
Yep.
Um, some people Google my name and say, ah, you're a hate group, and then won't even have a conversation. I hope one of your takeaways today is that you are putting into practice exactly what you are suggesting that we all need to put into practice in order to preserve intellectual freedom in our country. So I really appreciate you taking the time today to speak with me.
Thank you. So one of the themes of the book was meaningful conversations, and I think that's a good place to start.
This was great. Thank you so much. Have a great
Thank
afternoon.
you. You too.
This podcast is produced by the LGB Courage Coalition, a registered United States nonprofit fully funded by small donations like yours. We work to promote evidence-based medicine, ending the medicalization of gender nonconformity, and advocating for LGB rights. Supporting this show means supporting that work directly. If what you heard today mattered to you, please like, subscribe, and pass it along. Word of mouth is how independent shows like this one survive. You can reach us in the Substack comments section or by email at lgbcouragecoalition@gmail.com or through the contact page on our website at lgbcourage.org. We want to hear from you. And until next week, stay informed and ready to dissent.